Hey, deserving listeners, Love is Blind. Let's check it out, like Steve Brule.
I'm not that person anymore. You know, just like in the same way that like you used to be anxiously attached, I used to be avoidantly attached. And we as humans can grow and learn and get kind of hurt when you're like, I don't know if I'm dating you because I've dated you before. And I was like, ow.
So, big two thumb. If I had a third thumb, it would be up two. She left their previous date feeling hurt, and she says if she was outside the pods, she would have ran. That would be her normal tendency. She recognizes that, and she says, I don't want to do that here. I don't want to do that anymore. So I'm going to show that I'm into this, and I'm going to be vulnerable. Not only, so she gave him her most prized possession, her teddy bear thing, and he was perfect, I think, with the teddy bear. He's like, he's hugging it and he's tucking it in. It's like, I don't think she could have asked for a better response. It just occurred to me the neglect and abuse that she probably experienced growing up and how she might have been very needing of that object, the teddy bear, something to be with her. It's not uncommon for people to have that as children and to retain that into adult life. So kind of makes you think of Linus, right? And Charlie Brown, like what was going on in his household? Him and Sally, right? Sally. Anyway, so she not only leans in to pursue and not run away, but also is vulnerable to my avoidantly attached individuals out there. The key to overcoming and the key to improving one's attachments and healing is to be vulnerable, to say what she is saying right now, to recognize that hurt. I am now telling this person that hurt, crying when things hurt, crying alone, crying in front of the person that you want to trust, that you want to be involved with, to be vulnerable, to need to be at their mercy and to have them take care of you is so corrective and also bonding for both. But the other person probably feels rejected. If you never cry to your partner, if you never go, and I don't care what gender you are, if you never cry to your partner, if you never say, ouch, if you never say, I need you, and I'm, a part of me is hurt if that's a weird way to put it. Anyway, you get my point. That if you're not doing that, then not only are you denying your own needs in all likelihood, but you're denying the other person the gift that you give them when you are needing of them, when you are vulnerable in front of them. It's a gift. When, as a therapist, clients are vulnerable in front of me, it is a huge honor and gift of saying, hey, I trust, the client saying, I trust you. And what are you going to do with this? And here's an opportunity. I get so much gratification from taking care of people and helping people, whether it's my clients or people in my personal life. And when I'm vulnerable to people, then I'm giving them that. You can both give each other a gift at the same time. The gift of vulnerability and the gift of care happening. This is what builds relationships. Everyone wins. So to not do that is not only to protect yourself from the worry of being rejected or the acknowledgement of your own vulnerability, but you're also denying the other person the opportunity to take care of you. It's important. Avoidant people tend to consider it differently, where, well, I don't want to bother them with my emotions, or, they've got better things to do, or I'm okay, I can do things on my own. All those things are false. So she is, bucking that trend. She's working against that in the precise moment that would actually help. Now, he might still reject her, but that's not the point. The point is that she can feel confident and okay with herself to say, ow, that hurts, and hey, I need you, and I am really wanting to be with you. Now, she also is really connecting with Mason, at least sexually. It's kind of interesting how there's that often dichotomy in those triangles where there's a a sexual and then an emotional connection. You know, the Shaynas and the Natalies, that kind of thing. Your Chelseas and your Jessicas or whatever. Although, does that does that scan? Anyway, now Mason wants Madison and Meg, and has talked about in the lounge about how he truly just doesn't know who to be with. He's like, you know, Madison and Mason are more flirty. Mason and Meg, though, it's hard to know how Mason feels about Meg, because Meg talks a lot and puts a lot of energy, and it's not very deep. It's like Meg would be a great guest on the Joe Rogan. I think they even talked about the Joe Rogan podcast at some point. You know, like aliens and past lives and energies and whatever. You know, each to their own, doesn't matter. And I don't know how Mason's receiving it exactly. So if I was to take a guess, I would say that Mason, at the very least, feels more of a kinship, more together with Madison. But I imagine for Madison, she's thinking, Alex, even though he's not the sort of person I would normally go for, he might be the perfect person because he is so sensitive. You know, it's funny, I wanted to say that word, but then I thought, well, that's kind of a derogatory word when it's applied to men, but why would it be derogatory? It's used derogatorily, but it's only derogatory because of toxic masculinity and because of ridiculous expectations for men. So I think it's appropriate. I think she would say that if she had to choose, she would choose Alex because he seems like someone that she could depend on to be emotionally safe and explorational and overt. Mason doesn't seem, at least on the conversations that they've had, he doesn't seem to have that kind of self-awareness or care to have those conversations. Maybe he does, but it's not exhibited. So I don't know. I could also see Madison saying, yeah, I don't really know if either one of these are going to work out, because I like Alex's emotional talk, but at the same time, I don't really feel that kind of verve to be with him. And with Mason, I do feel that, but I don't necessarily know if I would want to marry him. I could see her doing that.
I also wanted to say that, like, I apologize. It was intense. It came off very strong, and I didn't mean for it to.
I don't want you to feel like you can't bring up, like, concerns or anything, but yeah, it felt like after that you kind of shut down on me. Mm-hmm. And that was disheartening a little.
Yeah, this is great. That's the way it felt too. It seemed like I don't know if I would say shutting down, but that is one way to put it, that he was souring on her. He's like, ooh, I don't know if this is going to work. And at the same time, if you're having a conversation like that, it's unavoidable to not be all bubbly all the time, right? So there's that. But as I was talking about in an earlier episode, the key to moving towards secure attachment style is giving the other person the benefit of the doubt and giving yourself the benefit of the doubt. She, leaving that date, would have question marks. Does he love me? Can I depend on him? Am I worthy? And she's giving herself clearly the benefit of the doubt and him the benefit of the doubt to lean in, give him her prized possession teddy bear to be vulnerable, thinking, well, I give it not only the benefit of the doubt that he can be won over and he will likely be in a better mood the next time, but also if things don't work out, everything will be okay. It would suck if things don't work out, but life will go on and I'll be sad. That's to the preoccupied folks out there, that is a key understanding that you want to cognitively really make a part of your routine of self-talk and reassurance, but also get to a point where it becomes really infused in your bones and that you have corrective experiences that teach you these realities that, because for the preoccupied folks, it's like, oh my God, I'm about to be abandoned. I'm about to be abandoned. They're cheating on me or they don't love me really, or and yes, of course, those are important concerns that anyone has. For preoccupied people and anxious people, it's amplified. But the extent that preoccupied people will take it will be such that it's the only thing that they think about and it feels life or death, but it's not. if your partner is cheating on you, if your partner leaves you, yes, that would suck. And it would hurt greatly. But 99.999% of the time, you will survive it and you'll live and you will find your happiness and you will have the next chapter in life, that sort of thing. Because without that acknowledgement of that reality, then it amplifies it even further, right? This is the only path to happiness. Now, as what he was saying is that as a part of his anxious, preoccupied attachment is he believes he's not worthy of love. And so if you have never experienced the relationships that teach you that you are worthy, there's not a lot of self-talk you can do to really make you feel like if you were to break up with your partner that you would be okay, because you don't believe fundamentally that you are okay. So that requires therapy and corrective experiences.
A little bit.
I shouldn't take past relationship traumas into new relationships. And so I apologize if I was like trying to do that or anything, but
Yeah.
I would love to keep talking to you and put that behind us.
Yes.
That'd be great.
And I'll stop yammering, but their demeanor also is positive in that they can say, well, let's talk about it, but let's have a good time. And that ability, that flexibility, that lightness, and that, mutual causality there is 2 thumbs up.
I was 17 and I felt so like responsible for like the well-being of my family. I would remember telling myself like, you are a robot, you don't feel anything. I would just completely disassociate from my own body.
Yeah, it just breaks my heart that she and so many people are forced to go through that. She's describing it very well. Also, she is once again exhibiting a lot of self-awareness and evidence that she has recovered enough that she can talk about it in a way that is not shameful and is honest and vulnerable, but real and authentic, right? So I'm glad that she can say this without feeling like there's something wrong with her or that she deserved it, or the alternative would be that she would still be stuffing these feelings or something. So it's a very green flag that she is aware of it. And also it breaks my heart. Yeah. She's describing it very well. The feeling of, she even described it in a way that isn't often described. She says, I felt responsible for the well-being of the family. I don't know if this is what she was getting at, but the common narrative, which is sometimes very much true, is that the child is very parentified and very much responsible for the parents, literally to keep the parents alive or to feed them because they're using substances and aren't eating, or whatever, or paying the bills for the parents when the parents could be working. And that does happen sometimes. But another thing happens, which I think is probably more common, or at least a bigger portion of the overall pie, is that children who are parentified and children who have parents who are not functioning, and especially if it's at the extreme that she's talking about, where the parents were chronically suffering from substance use and addiction, they were putting her in a position where, although she might not have had to do everything like pay the bills and feed the parents and drive the parents everywhere, the vibe that if the child takes her hypervigilant eye off of what's happening in the family, then horrific things will happen, death and loss, and she'll be blamed for it. This is the breeding ground for the codependent person, the overfunctioner person. I haven't seen any signs of an overfunctioner from her. We wouldn't necessarily see that, but sometimes we will see signs in the pods. There's a possibility that she just didn't adopt that, or she has recovered sufficiently from it, or whatever. I say all this because if you experience this, you might have a hard time articulating it or feeling valid for having that feeling, because you might not have had direct responsibility for the household, but you felt responsible. And the way that it manifests as, to elaborate on what I was saying earlier, of if I look away and if I relax, even if I'm paying attention, and if I relax for a second, horrible things are going to happen, because often they would. Horrible things might happen when they relax, or they turn away, or they focus on themselves, God forbid. Or horrible things would happen even though they are hypervigilant, and they just conclude, I wasn't hypervigilant enough or in the right way or something. And it's just a horrible position to put anybody in, because when there's drug addiction, no one outside has any control over what's happening. Everyone's powerless, because the individual with the addiction is powerless. If they're powerless, certainly everyone around them is powerless. So for a child to go through that and to have that feeling, and then the overwhelming pain, because it's not just the worry of what's happening, but the hurt of how did this happen? It's one thing for kids to be ignored, which is horrible, but it's a whole other thing for the kid to be ignored regarding their feelings and made responsible. It's like you got it coming and going, right? So there's all this pain that is completely unvalidated and unprocessed because there's no time, there's no one listening, no one attuning. And you're angry and you're terrified, and there's only a small set of ways in which humans can typically cope. It sounds like she was at a crossroads with drug addiction. I'm not hearing this, but there are hints that in her narrative that she has avoided drug addiction, right? And a very common scenario, she's 17, it's been modeled for her, it's in the house or friends or whatever. Because it's not just the drugs that can numb, but also the individuals and the friends that you can bond with around substance use. It's like, well, we're not close, but we have drugs together, and that can, be an incentive or a part of the coping. But it sounds like she did not choose that, so she only has a small set of ways of coping with it outside of that, one of which is, as she says, to convince herself that she's a robot, to turn off her emotions, and to dissociate from herself. Dissociation is complicated. There's a lot of forms. There's also different types and different levels. It sounds like what she is talking about is the conscious effort that people will resort to when they are under extreme stress like she was under. It's almost like a mindfulness practice, if you will. Typically, this is not what we are hoping people will achieve with mindfulness, but mindfulness practices or pseudo-mindfulness practices can actually be along this vein of, I am going to ignore my feelings because I don't have room for them right now. So I'm going to focus my attention on other things, and I'm going to convince myself that I'm a robot, and I'm just going to act like I don't have emotions, and I'm doing it consciously. And of course, this is just hallmark right down the middle of avoidant attachment, which she has talked about, that she tends to cope with attachment, insecurity, or loss, or worry, or conflict by avoiding. And it sounds like there were already precursors that led to that. If she had an early childhood that resulted in her coping with attachment, loss, or worry by leaning in, then she, in all likelihood, when she was 17, she was going through that, she would have leaned in somehow, either by becoming more signaling of her emotional state to her parents, whether they were receiving of that or not, or signaling to other people in her personal life, friends, family, maybe latching on to a boyfriend or something, or a teacher, or online stuff that could put her at risk as a minor, right? Or any number of other kinds of tendencies that preoccupied anxious people do. But avoidant people going into a situation like that, when they're faced with that, one of the things that they tend to do anyway is to shut down their emotions. And in a pinch, you can put even more effort into really trying to eliminate any emotions and eliminate the self completely, which is what she did. And the thing about these defense mechanisms, or the thing about any defense mechanism, is that the way it's described, and maybe the way I'm describing it, it can sound like a bad thing. It's not a bad thing. It's a good thing. If you didn't have that, then really horrible things would happen. You would obviously be suffering to a greater degree, but it could also cause huge, worse outcomes and consequences down the line, right? Like suicide or, I don't know, other kinds of more severe, long-lasting, consequential things. So I'm glad that she had that defense mechanism available to her to shut down and to dissociate and to get through it. It's better if she was not put in that position. But that's the thing with attachment styles, is that they are styles of dealing with attachment loss and worries of attachment loss. And we should all celebrate the fact that we have ways of coping that give us some reprieve. Hopefully we can have more functional ways of interpreting the world and managing our relationships so that we don't need those coping mechanisms, or we don't need the more extreme dysfunctional versions. And also we might be able to change them. But the thing that I'll say is that, there are 4 attachment styles that they've identified in the research. You have secure, you have preoccupied, anxious, and you have dismissive, avoidant, but you also have fearful, or what I will call disorganized. And these individuals, one way of describing them that I've said is they don't have any way of coping with attachment worries, whether it be abandonment worries or even close, there's worries of getting close because there's vulnerability there. So for these individuals, depending on the degree of their disorganized attachment, they have 0 ways of coping. In fact, for a lot of people that are disorganized, sometimes these people are characterized as being borderline or narcissistic or histrionic or other kinds of things, but they tend to suffer greatly. They very much long for closeness, but they get close and they start having paranoia and they start to get hostile because of like, what are you doing to me? And it's just a jumble. And so as these attachment worries are happening, they're just like the way that we see this in young children that are 18 months old is that when they are reunited with their attachment figure, who typically is abusing them, unfortunately, is the child in the lab will observe this, will do something like where they're glitching. For the preoccupied kids, they will run to the parents and say, "Don't ever leave me, don't ever leave me," right? To the avoidant kids, they barely acknowledge that the parents entered the room. To the disorganized kids, they have the impulse to run. It's like, "Oh my God, you're here," but "Oh my God, you're the danger as well." And they sometimes they just scream, or they just collapse, or they run toward and then away. There's lots of different glitchy behavior. There's no one direction. For the secure people, they run to the parents, but then they go back to the toys within like a typical healthy amount of time. So for the disorganized person, the analogy, that kid at 18 months old, that is retained into adulthood. As they get close to people, that's how it feels to them. It's just overwhelming and primordial. It has no conscious reason for it, that the individual might say a story as to why they're feeling the way they're feeling, but the feelings are so fundamental. They're the kinds of feelings that if you were raised even just slightly better than how they were raised, you might have never experienced that feeling since pre-memory, because it's so unbridled. The feeling is just so overwhelming. I have specialized in individuals like this, and in the beginning when they would describe to me their experience, I felt like I understood what they were saying, but I didn't. It took me a long time to really understand what they were saying. It's an emotional state that I don't remember feeling. I probably felt when I was, because I think all children, when they're very young, will go through this, right? Like I remember I would fall asleep in the car, as I would often do and as a very young child, and be napping. And my parents wouldn't want to wake me up, so they would go inside. I would wake up in the car by myself, and I would just be completely unglued because I'm like groggy, and I'm like, where is everybody? And that feeling, I remember feeling that feeling, and I don't know if I have ever felt that feeling as an adult. It's just so overwhelming, and it has dark, really horrible colors to it, So for people who are preoccupied or avoidant, I said that funny, preoccupied or avoidant, at least they have something to do. Avoidant people trust that if they run, they will feel better, and they will. And preoccupied people trust that if they lean in and signal and emote, then they'll probably feel better, and they often do. It's not ideal in the long run, right? There's that. I don't know why I went down that road. But point is that I just feel so bad for Madison. And I feel so, I don't know, proud of her, if that's the word. I commend her greatly for persevering and having the strength, and also to talk about it on camera. And to him. These two could be a very strong relationship. But I don't know, it seems like the edit is heading in the direction where they're going to become engaged, but I have a hard time envisioning them being romantical together. They're not showing it. In fact, I don't know if I showed it, they were talking about how they both enjoy pickles, and she was trying to make what seemed to be a bit of a sex joke, and he was like, oh, okay, and didn't follow suit. So it's like, I wonder if they have any, and it doesn't necessarily mean they won't be attracted to each other, but I don't know. I guess I really hope, I don't know why, maybe to reward people that are on the show that model healthy emotions and recovery and therapy talk and attachment awareness and emotional awareness and vulnerability. Like, I don't know why. It's like, I feel like they're on my team or something. Like, we represent a certain way of living and talking. And so I would really hope, it doesn't really matter. I hope that they are just happy either way, but it would be gratifying for them to work out, to have attraction, to have conflicts, but to work it out in the way that they have already, and to live happily ever after. All right, I want to remind everyone that we have an audio podcast. We've had it for almost 17 years. You can go to your podcast app and subscribe and listen to the audio episodes. And we have a website as well with some interesting little bits, especially if you're looking for a particular audio episode. You can go to the list page and do a search. And you can also go to YouTube and do a search. And everyone out there, please take care of yourself, because you deserve it. You really, really do.